Playing the pitch in soccer, one of Indiana Senator Todd Young's passions, taught him life lessons, from winning a state championship at Carmel High School to competing at the collegiate level for the U.S. Naval Academy. His path in the military eventually led him to the Marines and then to serving in government. A milestone political victory, a big win over Indiana powerhouse politician Evan Bayh.
Now, I acknowledge that campaigns are tough, really tough sometimes. Our Democrat neighbors fought hard, but now it's time to come together for the good of our state and our country.
Todd Young, his deep Hoosier roots, service in the military, and how working out in the Senate gym opened the door to what could be the biggest boon to U.S. semiconductor manufacturing in history. Indiana's senior senator, my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast, presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Todd Young, now entering his second term serving in the U.S. Senate. Among his big accomplishments so far, co-sponsoring bipartisan legislation designed to weaken China's global grip on microchip production and provide a big boost to the U.S. economy.
Thanks to the CHIPS and Science Act, Skywater Technology is moving forward with its plans to partner with Purdue to build a $1.8 billion facility. In fact, a corridor of the semiconductor industry will run through the state of Indiana.
An interesting tie to how the CHIPS Act came about. Young and Chuck Schumer exercising next to one another in the Senate gym. A page out of Politics Makes Strange Bedfellows. And I am pleased to be joined on the Business and Beyond podcast by Indiana Senator Todd Young. And Senator, thanks for taking the time to join me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Gary. It's great to be with you.
Hey, I know you've been busy on Capitol Hill on a number of measures, but I think you've been spending a fair amount of time, too, at least with one eye on the World Cup, right? I know you're a former soccer player. What's your take on the USA's performance in the World Cup? I mean, there was some good stuff, but I think, a little disappointment there at the end.
Yeah, sort of a box score. On one hand, we upped our game. We made the World Cup this time and performed fairly well. We had some missteps along the way, but I think many of us were hoping. I've been watching soccer for years. It was my passion growing up. In fact, I played in high school and played in college, and I was really pulling for Team USA, and I actually think they had the talent to break through, to make it to the Elite Eight. Yeah. And they did squeak through out of the group stage, which is where you first start and then advance into the Sweet 16. But we just made some mistakes that you can't make if you want to go deep into this tournament that we call the World Cup. And of course, in 4 years, it's going to be in the United States.
Yeah.
Mexico and Canada across North America. So we have an opportunity with a really young team, I think, to show quite well in 4 years.
What do you think it's going to take for the U.S., the men's side? The women have, certainly broken through, but on the men's side, enormous improvement, no question about it. Obviously, such a big population. Is there something missing here that to get the men's team over the top?
Yeah, I hate to say it because we've got such talented people and they work so hard to put it all together. But I think our coaching was pretty good. Bearhalter, and I'm a little biased because I went back to my college career, which was not particularly notable at the Naval Academy. All right, I made the team, I lettered, but I was on the field against Greg Bearhalter.
Oh, really? Wow.
He played for North Carolina. But I think he did a pretty good job. He was out-coached, I believe, the last game. So that's one area where, whether it's Bearhalter or another, we need to continue to up our game. And the other area is just our strikers, the guys who are supposed to put the ball in the back of the net. They need to make the most of their opportunities. And that's been a problem for about 20 years, ever since I've really been diving into the sport at the international level. So those are my thoughts for
Yeah.
whatever they're worth. Yeah.
Okay, let's get to the real business at hand. And
Yeah, we're a basketball state, so
that's exactly.
I don't want to spend too much time on that, right?
That's good. And Purdue and IU look to be really strong this year, so we're looking forward to that. CHIPS Act, which has gotten a lot of attention, certainly throughout the United States, and in particular here in Indiana, where there's potential for real impact. I think we're actually already seeing it. I want to talk about some of those particulars, but you co-authored that with Chuck Schumer, right? So strange bedfellows. You actually bipartisan effort in Washington, D.C.
Uh-huh.
How did that happen?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, it happened through a personal relationship that started and really has developed a little bit in the Senate gym of all places. Right?
Really?
Chuck works out on the recumbent bike next to me. He uses his flip phone and conducts business. And, I wake up and have an insane amount of coffee early in the morning and do some cardio at a machine next to him. So we've gotten to talking about different things, usually debating over the years. But one thing we really agree on is the sort of existential challenge that the Chinese Communist Party could present to the United States. And we developed some legislation several years ago about upping America's game in terms of research and development in some key tech areas. We also recognized a particular vulnerability to our economy and to our national security enterprise. We depend on countries in the Asia Pacific for almost all of our computer chips, especially those that go into our weapon systems. So we started working and reworking legislation, and eventually, through a whole lot of blood, sweat, and tears, finally, we got that signed into law just months ago. And it's going to be a huge upside benefit to the state of Indiana. We make things in Indiana. We're a manufacturing state. We take a lot of pride in that. And you could see Indiana, perhaps some surrounding states, making their mark in this 21st century is, on the coast, they make software, and they'll continue to do that and do that well. But we could really make the hardware that is essential to military effectiveness and to help run a modern economy. And we're starting to carve out a bit of a niche in that area already.
Yeah. I want to talk about that jobs impact, but back on the national security piece. Give us your certainly on the inside there on that. What's in your view, what was the real threat from a national security standpoint?
Well, when you're dealing with a country like China that has a state capitalist model, so it's a capitalist country in the sense that they produce things for consumers and businesses, and they of course consume a lot of those things, bring them into the country as well. But in the end, it's the Chinese Communist Party that's in charge, and they can manipulate markets, and there's a real fear that they'll manipulate markets to their own end, cut off our supply, whether it's from Chinese suppliers or those in neighboring countries like Taiwan. Cut off our supply to get these mission critical computer chips. We got a taste of what this could look like during the pandemic, when we had auto plants up in Fort Wayne, as you know, Gary, that had to idle a couple times just over the last year on account of not having sufficient supply of computer chips. So we really need to make our economy more resilient. And then there's a separate problem, but related problem, which is the computer chips that go into our guided missile destroyers and our radars and our sophisticated weaponry and our systems to prevent nuclear weapons from falling on us. Those computer chips are also sourced from other countries. And we have to have a highly trusted domestic source for those computer chips. And that led to our significant investment in enticing many of these manufacturers to locate on our soil, and then also investing in next generation research. So the fastest chips required to outpace Chinese technology are made here in the United States as well.
There were critics, certainly, including in your own party, in your own state. A number of your colleagues voted against it. How do you kind of reconcile that or react to that opposition to the CHIPS Act?
Well, listen, I understand this is a bit of an unnatural act for a lot of Republicans to sign on to a big spending bill. Let's just sort of state the obvious from the outset, right? So I was swimming against the current there. But it's also a very natural inclination for many of us to support our national security. And since I've already established this is a major national security investment, that's how I was able to get significant support among Republicans in the U.S. Senate and a pretty decent sprinkling of support over in the House. I suspect had we had a Republican president continuing to champion this initiative, as frankly President Trump and his State Department did for a period of time before he left office, the outcome with respect to a number of Republicans would have been a little bit different. But I was proud to do something hard at a time when, frankly, a lot of Americans were questioning whether or not members of Congress could do anything hard and just frankly took a poll every time they wanted to accomplish something for the good of the country.
Yeah. In your opinion, this is speculation, obviously, but what do you see as the impact ultimately in Indiana? We've already seen impact with Skywater technology up at Purdue and West Lafayette, other investment in that part of the state, the assets here with Purdue, with Notre Dame, IU, and others. What do you see potentially? Could Indiana become one of these tech hubs that I think as part of the CHIPS Act, right, is creating these technology hubs?
So in addition to making more chips here, which is what the Skywaters of the world are going to do, and to packaging more of the chips, which is actually a really high value added activity, and we're poised to be pretty good in that area. We're going to see less disruption among our manufacturers, which is real important to get products into the hands of consumers. So that'll prepare us for whether it's the next global pandemic or the next geopolitical intervention from, whether it's China or somebody else. But as you really look at the sizzle in this legislation for Hoosiers, I think it's going to be the research investment that goes into Indiana University, Notre Dame, Purdue, and others, leading to the spinoff of all sorts of startups, which can employ Hoosiers, and many of these startups, of course, will grow into larger companies. And then there is, as you indicate, there's a provision in the legislation that seeks to designate a number of areas around the country as technology hubs. And you can imagine the state of Indiana, because of our resident expertise in agriculture and life sciences, becoming, for example, designated the Ag Informatics Center of Excellence in the country, and therefore the repository for quite a lot of venture capital dollars coming in. If you receive a designation as this, or say the advanced manufacturing, hub of the country, you would receive additional workforce development dollars. You would receive some incentives to ensure that more of our startup companies are able to get over the so-called valley of death early in their life cycle, so that they can make it into years where you tend to have more profitability and survivability longer term. So that's the really enticing value proposition is getting that designated. And then government can make the handoff to private sector. You see more private dollars flowing in, and we'll have that flywheel of private investment that we've always been searching for in the Midwest, but we haven't really benefited from the same weight of investment from the federal government that, say, Silicon Valley or Boston or the North Carolina Research Triangle have. So this would correct for that inequity.
Can Indiana produce the workforce needed for these industries? There's a lot of concern about that. Again, we've got tremendous academic institutions, 4-year institutions, not to mention Ivy Tech and Vincennes and the 2-year institutions as well. But is that a potential, high hurdle?
Well, it is. And so this is a challenge. Everyone's having to up their game. I think we in Congress should have to up our game as we deal with this generational, maybe multi-generational challenge posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Our business communities having to up their game. And I would say our educational institutions are going to have to as well. That means ensuring that their curricula are reflective of the needs of local labor markets, that are K through 12 or pre-K through 14. Ecology is preparing people to go survive and succeed at these universities. We've provided the resourcing in the CHIPS and Science Act. I mean, there's funding for people to meaningfully participate in this tech economy in the heartland by funding everything from community college to postdoctorate education in these tech areas like hypersonics, battery storage, semiconductors. It's going to be up to the leaders of our education institutions to make sure our people are prepared.
What's your take on first of all, the national economy? A lot of speculation about recession. Are we in a recession now? How deep might a recession go? As you look to next year, you look at some of the macro factors out there with inflation and fuel prices and supply chain. What's your take on where things are?
Well, listen, I don't have the ability to talk the economy down. Diagnostically, I'm anxious, as are a lot of Hoosier businesses and investors and rank and file workers. The problem with inflation, and it's been said by many for a long period of time, is once you get into an inflationary cycle, it's very difficult to find your way out. So my strong suspicion is that the Federal Reserve will have to continue ticking up interest rates. And the notion of a soft landing, that's a phrase we throw around liberally, but the landing won't be soft for those workers who are put out of work, for those businesses that don't make it. And so that's what's so unfortunate here. But I think we're going to experience some pain. Let's just hope that pain is fairly short-lived. Let's say the 6 to 9 month time frame, as opposed to for the next couple of years. And I'll do whatever we can from a policy standpoint, of course, to help us, rebound. But I see some pain ahead, unfortunately.
Yeah, what'd you take on the Indiana economy? A lot of challenges, no question, but a lot of good things going on too. As you look at the state, and be it whatever the sector might be, including the technology we're talking about. But how would you characterize Indiana's economy?
Well, I think one of the things you need to do with a business or with your governments is to make sure that you're healthy, so that when a crisis comes, you're prepared for it. And we've done a great job as a state over the years, I think, balancing our budgets so that we won't have to make as many hard decisions, perhaps, when we see a dip in the revenue coming in. Our businesses are healthy, and to the extent they need to be diversified based on the estimation of their executives and their ownership, they're doing that. And our state's more diversified, far more diversified than it used to be. I mean, goodness gracious, we have a Salesforce Tower in Indianapolis. Yeah. For those who moved into Indianapolis for the last decade or so, let me tell you, it didn't used to be this way. Right. I remember I grew up in Indiana, class of 90 Carmel High School, back when we had cow fields in Carmel. I got to tell you, it is amazing as you go up that Meridian corridor and see all the businesses are there. So we're going to not only survive, but I think a state like Indiana that's done its work is poised to do well coming out of something like this, as businesses flee from, maybe Michigan or Illinois, where the environment's perhaps less supportive.
We'll have much more ahead with Indiana Senator Todd Young when we return on the Business and Beyond podcast. We'll talk about his time at the U.S. Naval Academy and a lot more when the Business and Beyond podcast returns.
At PNC Bank, we're committed to making a difference in the lives of our customers and communities by helping them move forward financially. As a Main Street bank, we try to do right by our customers with every encounter. Our local teams offer personalized financial advice to help guide you in making the best decision. We're proud to be part of your community. PNC Bank. See how we can make a difference for you at pnc.com. Copyright 2022, the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc., all rights reserved.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week, Indiana Senator Todd Young. And Senator Young talked a lot about the CHIPS Act and the legislation, the economy in the first half. Let's get a little more personal with you. Now, grew up in Carmel, but you were born in Pennsylvania, right? How did that all work and you get to Indiana?
Yeah, it's an inconvenient bio point that I have to explain the Pennsylvania thing, but it's my dad's first real job out of college, not working for his father at the family small business, was in Pennsylvania. And he worked for a company, I think, for about 18 months. He was a salesperson, and that company went belly up after a short order. So I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, just about long enough for us to figure out what he was going to do back in the Midwest and move back to Indiana. But we have long-standing Hoosier roots going back many generations. And for all practical purposes, I grew up in Indianapolis, near the Broad Ripple area. Before that was a fashionable sort of cosmopolitan scene. And then we moved up to Carmel, and that was where I spent most of my childhood.
So what describe your childhood? What was it like? Obviously, you had an interest in sports. I assume you were strong academically. What was a young Todd Young like?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time outdoors as kids in my generation. I think had a habit of doing. I love sports, so I was always up for a pickup game of basketball or football or maybe soccer. I think mom enrolled me in the Carmel Dads Club soccer program because I was a small kid. I was a really small kid. I tried different sports and I'd do okay, but if it involved contact, I wasn't really good. So I think she associated that with a sport that didn't involve a whole lot of contact. And until she saw me begin to play soccer, and I
was going to say soccer is a pretty physical game.
Yeah. And then I got a little more aggressive over the years, but I have to say that really took. And I think I said it earlier, soccer was my passion growing up. Most of the life lessons I learned were probably learned out on the soccer field, teamwork and hard work and patience and, so just all kinds of great lessons. So I did a lot of that growing up. Had an older brother he's still in north of Indianapolis, younger sister. We're a close family. I lived in a pretty safe neighborhood. My parents were really engaged in our lives. And I have to say, Carmel was a great place to grow up. It really was. And it was just at a time when Carmel was kind of starting to grow. It wasn't the Carmel that most of us think of right now. There wasn't one roundabout, to my knowledge, in the area. And, the schools were good. So, I still think of that upbringing quite a bit. And there's no question in my mind that it makes me feel really grateful and makes me want for my children and really everyone some of the same advantages that I had that other kids don't have.
Yeah. What do you think of Carmel today as you reflect back when you were young? I know I just had Jim Brainerd on the podcast talking about his impending retirement, at least from politics. Wow. That is a city roundabouts, but just so many other things have just dramatically changed.
Well, Jim Brainerd is one of the most impressive public servants I've ever met, just based on legacy, right? I mean, he has helped shepherd, and that's a good word for it. There have been other leaders, civic, governmental, business along the way who've been very involved and very important to the success of Carmel, and most of whose names we'll never know, but Carmel used to be a pretty slow place. The best restaurant in Carmel when I moved to Carmel was Country Kitchen on Carmel Drive. I mean, this was where the cops went and got donuts and coffee, and you still had the McDonald's right there. But there wasn't much more. You had Muldoon's, an early version of Muldoon's, come in after a couple of years. You're nodding your head affirmatively. You remember those years, Gary.
That's funny.
But that was Carmel, and I'm really not kidding. There were a lot of cow fields around. There was a lot of farmland. There was nothing all the way into high school west of Meridian. It was all fields. There was a period in which our soccer fields were moved over to the Spring Mill area west of Meridian, right? And that was where our high school fields were, in fact. And but there was a period of time in which there was a pig farmer, or actually a guy who wanted to develop some real estate over there, and they were told no by the local authorities. And so he said, all right, well, I'm going to start a pig farm. And you could barely stand to play soccer because of the stench of the pig farm. Now, this is now where the fresh market is located, all kinds of, sort of like worldly cuisine. There was a pig farm there. So I remember the good old days in Carmel, and we've just come a long way from those days. But, the people haven't changed much. They love their families. They love their community. It's a safe area. They love the schools. And the commute it just isn't as bad as it used to be, as you had to go to the Indianapolis area in order to.
So you enlisted in the Navy, right? Out of high school?
Yeah, I had an opportunity. I was enlisted in the Navy for a year plus. It was 1990. Mom said, go. He's going in the Navy. There'll be no problem. Navy hadn't been in a fight in forever. Within a few weeks, the first Gulf War broke out. So Mom was anxious, but I was in a classroom the whole time, so it wasn't a real serious situation.
Okay, well, talk about the U.S. Naval Academy. You got an appointment to the Naval Academy, which is obviously quite prestigious. What about the Academy really attracted you?
Couple of things. I first learned about the Naval Academy from Soccer America magazine, and their Division I soccer team had made the tournament. And I saw the look on the faces of some of these players. They had the close haircuts. They looked like strong young men. They looked pretty intense. And I just got to thinking about the challenge. I really like challenges. I like to tackle challenges that are entirely unfamiliar to me, which is ultimately, I think, led me to my current job. But that appealed to me, and the prospect of potentially being able to play Division I soccer was interesting, combined with an ethic of service. That was really important to my family. So those things wrapped together all lent themselves to going to the Naval Academy.
Describe to someone who may not be familiar and how you talk about challenging, how challenging it is to attend, whether it's Naval Academy, West Point, whatever the case might be, but a military academy, the academic rigor, and you played sports as well on top of it. That's another layer as well.
Well, I didn't fit the profile for the typical, I think, would-be midshipman at the U.S. Naval Academy. So many young kids, and they're amazing. They're remarkable. I actually have some discretion over giving nominations to these young people who apply to attend Annapolis, for example. And many of them plan from a young age to be astronauts or test pilots or Navy SEALs. And I came to it late in my high school career, as I've described. It is a academically, physically, and I would even say emotionally rigorous experience. For me, the physical challenge wasn't that great. I was prepared for that. Academically, I really had to learn how to study. I was a very good student in high school, but not as good as many of the valedictorians and salutatorians that I was thrown in the mix with. And then emotionally, it's just, so many young people, especially today, I would say, are told from a very young age from their parents and peers that they're special, they're unique, the world revolves around them, and you are disabused of any special, unique qualities you might have when you go into an environment like that in a healthy way. If you want to be part of a unit, you need to do what is in the best interest of the unit. Sometimes that means recognizing that your own desires and interests ought to be second to the desires of your country in this case.
So you had military service, but it's kind of started your post-military career, if you will, in Orange County, right? In Paoli?
There was a step or two in between that. So left the Marine Corps in 2000.
You got your MBA in Chicago at University of Chicago, right?
That's right. That's right. Actually began that and almost finished it while I was in the Marines at night. I had a few credits left, and I have to say, after a decade being wearing a military uniform in school and in the Marine Corps, I was ready for a little break, Gary. So I finished up my last couple of credits studying in London. There was a little institute over there that Margaret Thatcher chaired. And earned a master's degree there. And then I came back to the United States, and I did what I'll tell my children never to do, which is I showed up in an unfamiliar town. It was Washington, D.C., without a job. And so I ran out of money, and one Senator Dick Lugar was kind enough to give me a shot at my first job out of the Marine Corps. So I spent about a year and a half working for him as a policy advisor on trade and some other matters. Moved back to Indiana, and I was a management consultant for a company you're probably familiar with, Gary, Crow.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then, I hope I'm not boring people, but
No.
I've moved around a lot. At night, I went to law school, met my now wife, and she was a practicing attorney in her hometown of Paoli. And I did that for a couple of years until, I like to say, I found an exit strategy from the practice of law. I ran for Congress.
Uh-huh.
Right? Yeah.
And you were a United States congressman, I think, for 3 terms.
That's right. 3 terms in the House. And then obviously had an opportunity in 2016 as Dan Coates retired to run for this seat.
Hey, you mentioned Dick Lugar. Would you consider him one of your key mentors as you reflect on things?
No, he was a role model is the best way to put it. He was by reputation a fairly quiet person, but when he spoke, it really mattered. And I spent a fair amount of time, just over an 18-month period, observing how he worked. He prepared a lot. He was a great student. He actually knew things. And there are a lot of people who do my job who don't seem to know much, right? They go through the motions, and it was important for him to accomplish things. And so he was a role model. And I also liked how he carried himself.
Mm-hmm.
You never had to worry about Dick Lugar embarrassing the state of Indiana or our country. And there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. You seem to be, a politician who tends to reach across the aisle. And, CHIPS Act would be an example of that. Is that a lost art? I mean, we see so many examples of divisiveness that exist in our country today. Is that spirit of cooperation gone from politics?
It's not dead. It's not been snuffed out. It doesn't capture a lot, present company accepted, a lot of media attention oftentimes, because there's not as much sizzle to cooperating than there is disagreeing and perhaps even saying provocative things, right?
Yeah.
But it still exists. I don't want to be too hard on individuals who aren't seen doing it as much, because this is a different atmosphere than it was 20 years ago. I know, because I spent a little time here in Washington. But at the same time, I don't want to be too easy on those who don't try. And I do make a significant effort to try and be at the table when we're working on major pieces of legislation. And maybe I can get there and then maybe I can't. But, frankly, you're just kind of going through the motions unless you're working with colleagues who see the world differently. Because at least in the United States Senate, it takes 60 votes to get anything of consequence done. That by definition means working with people across the aisle.
I've long wondered this about congressmen and senators, those who serve in Washington, and managing that back and forth between Washington and home in Indiana. How challenging can that be? You want to stay obviously connected with the state, with what's going on here, coming back here, and that travel back and forth and the demands on that. Give me an idea on what that's like. Is it tough on your family?
It is challenging. I don't want to feel sorry for myself. I'm privileged. I got an amazing job, and I feel really blessed to have it, especially during what are sometimes really challenging times. But with that said, I get up early on a Monday. I come back late on a Thursday. I work Fridays, and oftentimes we'll have weekend commitments, especially as you're trying to balance the demands of both a campaign and your day job. But with that said, going back to my family, my dad was on the road all the time selling stuff and didn't have a secure paycheck. He got to eat what he killed, as they say in the business. Yep. And there are a lot of Hoosiers out there doing that. So if I want to lead them, thinking back to the Naval Academy, day one, right? If you want to lead, you better be out there doing a lot of things those who you want to lead are also having to go through. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of puts things into perspective, I think.
Just were reelected to a second term in the U.S. Senate, defeating Tom McDermott, a race that, as I followed it a little bit, indications it might be, competitive, but it really didn't end up being that competitive. In the end, you won by a sizable margin. And you did not get an endorsement from Donald Trump, which a lot was made on that. You didn't need it, I guess.
No, I didn't need it. I'm a constitutional conservative, and I guess that makes me a bit unique for some in the Republican Party. But listen, I pledge that I will uphold the Constitution of the United States, and I'll continue to do that. And I'm glad that's the sort of conservative leadership Hoosiers are looking for.
What's next for Todd Young? I mean, you just again were elected to another term in the Senate. A lot of people, yours is a name very high on a lot of lists. As you look at what's next for Todd Young, what might that be?
Well, listen, I want to reassure Hoosiers and frankly, my fellow fiscal conservatives that I haven't forgotten that we just authorized a lot of money to reshore microprocessor production in this country, to invest in R&D and so forth, designate tech hubs. We're going to get that right. So I'm going to work really hard on implementation. I'll be a conscientious U.S. Senator. And at some point, am I going to begin thinking about other professional opportunities? I haven't given that any thought after an extended job interview and performance review. I'm really focused on doing this one right, but perhaps at some point I'll
as we wrap up, Senator Young, back to the whole microelectronics, the chips. You really think that this can be? I know there are a lot of people here in Indiana who do think this can be kind of one of those next big things for the state of Indiana.
Well, I really do. And let me take it from kind of the firm level, the technology level, bringing it right down to our people, right? There are a lot of people in this country, as our country as the economy has evolved, and we seemingly reward sweat as compared to knowledge a lot less than we used to, right? It's a knowledge economy. And there are a lot of people who are feeling left behind. They didn't go to the same good schools growing up. They don't have the same educational opportunities and so forth. This is the opening volley in what I hope are a number of successive efforts to bring everyone along, to make them feel like they can meaningfully participate in this dynamic 21st century economy. They can earn the material rewards for themselves and their families and their communities. And they can help us, frankly, defend our way of life, outcompete and out-innovate the Chinese Communist Party. To me, I'm really excited about this development, and I'm privileged to be able to have played a role in this opening volley.
Indiana Senator Todd Young, my guest on the Business and Beyond podcast. Senator Young, thank you so much for taking the time. I know we'll be talking, I assume, more in the future, especially when it comes to the CHIPS Act, because there'll be a lot of implications for the state. So thank you for joining us, and Root USA Soccer on too.
All right. Thanks, Gary.
All right. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. It's a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can download all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com and download from there. This is Gary Dick. We'll see you next time.